Leviticus is often the book people skip. It feels unfamiliar, repetitive, and distant from modern life. Laws, sacrifices, rituals, and regulations that seem hard to relate to. But what if Leviticus isn't about rules at all? What if it's about how broken people can live near a holy God? Leviticus sits at the heart of the Bible's story. In this video, we'll explore why it matters, what it reveals about God, and how its message of holiness and grace still speaks powerfully today. Overview. Leviticus is the third book of the Bible and takes place entirely at Mount Sinai. The Israelites have been freed from slavery, and God now dwells among them in the tabernacle. The central question of Leviticus is simple but profound: how can a holy God live in the midst of an imperfect people? Traditionally attributed to Moses, Leviticus is written as divine instruction. The laws and rituals are not meant to burden Israel, but to shape them into a distinct community that reflects God's character. Leviticus teaches that God is not distant. He desires closeness, but nearness requires care, reverence, and transformation. Sacrifices and drawing near to God, Leviticus 1-7. The book opens with detailed instructions for sacrifices. Burnt offerings, grain offerings, peace offerings, sin offerings, and guilt offerings. To modern readers, these rituals can feel foreign. But for Israel, they formed a language of relationship. Sacrifice acknowledged two truths. God is holy, and humans fall short. These offerings were not about earning forgiveness. They were about restoration. Each sacrifice created a way for people to draw near without fear. Leviticus begins by showing that access to God is possible, but it comes with reverence and intention. The role of the priests, Leviticus 8-10. God appoints priests to serve as mediators between himself and the people. Aaron and his sons are consecrated for this role. But the seriousness of holiness is made clear when Nadab and Abihu offer unauthorized fire before the Lord. Their sudden death is shocking, but it reinforces a central theme. God is loving and present, but he is not casual. Leviticus teaches that closeness to God requires obedience, humility, and respect. Holiness is not about perfection, but about honoring God's boundaries. Clean and unclean, everyday holiness, Leviticus 11-15. Leviticus then turns to laws about food, disease, and bodily conditions. These chapters often confuse readers, but they served an important purpose. Clean and unclean distinctions reminded Israel daily that they were set apart. Holiness touched every area of life, not just worship. These laws also promoted health, order, and awareness of human fragility. Leviticus shows that faith is not confined to sacred spaces. Holiness shapes everyday habits, choices, and attitudes. The Day of Atonement, Leviticus 16. At the center of Leviticus stands the Day of Atonement. Once a year, the high priest entered the most holy place to make atonement for the sins of the entire nation. 2 goats were used. One was sacrificed. The other, the scapegoat, symbolically carried the people's sins away into the wilderness. This moment highlighted both justice and mercy. Sin was taken seriously, but forgiveness was offered. The Day of Atonement revealed God's desire to cleanse, restore, and dwell with his people. Holy living and loving others, Leviticus 17-22. Leviticus then moves from ritual to relationships. God calls Israel to live differently, not just in worship, but in ethics, sexuality, justice, and compassion. One command stands out. Love your neighbor as yourself, Leviticus 19-18. Holiness is not isolation. It is love expressed through integrity, fairness, and care for others. Leviticus challenges the idea that faith is private. True holiness is visible in how people treat one another. Blessings, warnings, and hope, Leviticus 23-27. The final chapters outline festivals, blessings for obedience, and consequences for rebellion. These warnings are not threats, but reflections of reality. Turning away from God leads to disorder and loss. Returning to him brings restoration. The book ends with hope. Even if Israel fails, God leaves room for repentance and renewal. Leviticus closes by affirming that God's covenant is rooted in grace, not abandonment. Key themes in Leviticus. God's holiness. God is pure, just, and worthy of reverence. God's nearness. Holiness does not push people away. It invites transformation. sacrifice and restoration. Forgiveness is made possible through God's provision. Holiness in daily life. Faith shapes every area of living. Love is the heart of the law. Holiness is expressed through love and justice. Grace within obedience. God disciplines but never abandons his people. Key verses in Leviticus. Leviticus 1 verse 1, the Lord called to Moses. God initiates relationship. Leviticus 11 verse 44, be holy, because I am holy. The central call of the book. Leviticus 16 verse 30, on this day atonement will be made for you. God provides cleansing. Leviticus 17 verse 11, the life of a creature is in the blood. The seriousness of sin and sacrifice. Leviticus 19 verse 18, love your neighbor as yourself. Holiness expressed through love. Leviticus 26 verse 12, I will walk among you. God's desire to dwell with his people. Relevance Today. Leviticus challenges modern assumptions about faith. It reminds us that God is loving but not casual. Near but not ordinary. Grace does not remove reverence. In a culture that values convenience and comfort, Leviticus calls for intentional living. It asks us to reflect God's character in our choices, relationships, and values. Holiness today is not about rituals, but about alignment. Living set apart, not above others, but for something greater. Closing thought. Leviticus teaches that holiness is not about distancing ourselves from God, but about drawing closer to him with humility and trust. The same God who calls his people to be holy also makes a way for them to stand in his presence. Holiness is not a burden. It is an invitation to live fully in the nearness of God.